Alright, so lesson 108, square roots revisited and radical equations. So radicals is just another way to say square roots, alright, that means radicals. And we're going to solve these equations. So, how many solutions does each of these have? Well, if I just have the equation x equals 4, that's one solution. Okay? Now, over here, I have x squared equals 4. There are actually two answers to this. What is x? Anybody know if x squared equals 4? Evie? Yeah? And there's another solution. Drew? Negative 2, right? Because what is negative 2 squared? It's positive 4 when you plug it in, right? We use parentheses, so you square the negative. So anytime you have an x squared like that, we have two solutions, all right? Two solutions. So we have to always check our answers, okay, to make sure that it works when we're doing radicals or square roots. So the first thing you guys want to do is we want to isolate the square root part, okay? So whatever is under the house all stays together, and we want to get rid of anything else, like this guy right here. So I'm going to add 3 to both sides, and we get the square root of x minus 6 is now equal to 3. All right, then to undo a square root. How do we undo a square root? Drew? We square both sides, all right? So we're going to square the square root, and that's the inverse operation. So this is going to cancel the radical, and we have just x minus 6 left over. And then on this side, I have 3 squared, which is 9. And then now I can finally add the 6 over, my final step, because I got rid of the radical. And so my answer is 15. All right, you have to check your answer every time. All right, because sometimes we get what's called extraneous solutions. That means the algebra said it was true, but it's not true when you go back and plug it in. All right, so let's go back and plug it into the original equation. So I have the square root. I'm plugging in 15 for x, and I'm going to see if I get a true story here. So 15 minus 6 is 9. And the square root of 9 is 3. And 0 is equal to 0, so it's true. Okay. Let's try another one. So go ahead and write that down. The square root of x minus 6, all under the house. And then minus 6 plus x equals 0. So same first step as last time, where our goal is to isolate the radical. All right, I want to get the radical by itself, which means I need to get rid of these two things right here. I've got two terms to get rid of. So I'm going to add 6 to both sides, and at the same time, I'm going to subtract x from both sides. Okay, so I'm canceling this minus 6 and this x. So now I have the radical by itself. And on this side, we have 6 minus x. Now I'm going to get rid of the radical. So once I isolate it, I want to get rid of it. So what I do is I square both sides. Now, we're actually squaring this entire thing, and we're squaring this entire thing. So the square undoes the square root, and I just have x minus 6 on this side. Now this is different, the right-hand side. I don't know if you guys have seen this before. So with a radical, you guys have seen this though, okay? So 6 minus x squared is the same thing as 6 minus x times 6 minus x. What are we going to have to do here? We are going to have to FOIL, all right? So I'm going to FOIL that out. So I still have x minus 6 on this side. We've got 6 times 6 is 36. We've got 6 times negative x is negative 6x. We have negative x times 6 is negative 6x. And my last is negative x times negative x, which is positive x squared. Okay, now we have a quadratic. Anytime we have a quadratic like this, we are going to set it equal to 0, and we're going to factor tractor. Okay, so I'm going to keep my x squared positive, so I'm going to keep it on the right-hand side. So I'm going to subtract x, and I'm going to add 6, and add 6. Notice I lined up my number with my number, and my x's, they're all friends, they're all going to add together. Okay, so I have 0 now on the left side. And over here I have 36 plus 6 gives me 42. All three of these x terms are going to add together. Negative 6x, negative 6x, negative 1x gives me negative 13x. And then plus x squared. Okay, just so this looks familiar, let's put it in order. So it's x squared minus 13x plus 42. And now we're going to factor it. All right, so 0. And now I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to be positive 42 and add to be negative 13. Bethany, what do you think? Good. So negative 7 and negative 6. Those are going to add to negative 13 and multiply to positive 42. All right, now we have our solutions. So Jordan, what would my solutions be here? Good. Okay. Now we have to check both of our answers because we could have an extraneous solution. So we go back to the beginning and we're going to plug in 6. And then I'm going to plug in 7. All right, so original equation, and I'm going to write it over here off to the side. Your check usually doesn't take that much time, you guys. So we're going to check 6 first. So I'm going to plug in a 6 anywhere I see x, right? So I have 6 minus 6, another minus 6, another plus 6 equals 0. All right. So 6 minus 6 gives me the square root of 0, which is 0. And then negative 6 plus 6 also gives me 0. So 6 works. Okay. We checked it. Give it a little smiley face. All right. And now we're going to check 7. So let's come up here and check 7. So I'm going to rewrite this equation with 7 plugged in for x. And we've got 7 minus 6 is 1. Negative 6 plus 7 is 1. What's the square root of 1? 1. Does this one work, you guys? Does 2 equal 0? No. So this is what I'm talking about, where you get an answer, thanks to your algebra, that does not work. So this answer, you guys, in your notes, you can cross it off. I also want you to write extraneous. Okay, it's called an extraneous solution. That means that this is the only true solution, is positive 6. Yeah, Drew? So you can't do that. That is a good point. He's saying, well, what about taking plus and minus the square root, making it plus or minus, right, when you do square root? So if I have just the square root of 4, that's equal to just 2. But if I have x squared equals 4, and I'm solving for it, that's equal to plus and minus 2. So because it's already in the equation and we're not like solving for a variable, it's only positive 1, so it does mean it's extraneous. Okay, good question. All right, solve and check. So let's try another one. So I have the square root of x squared plus 9 minus 5 equals 0. You cannot take the square root of this. A lot of people try to square root this. You cannot do that because of the plus sign. All right? Only if everything was being multiplied inside there could you take the square root. So we have to solve the same way we've been solving. All right? So Ben, what do you think the first step is? Yep. So I'm going to add 5 to both sides so I can get the square root by itself. So I have the square root of x squared plus 9 equals 5. All right. And Aaron, what do you think the next step is? Yep, square both sides. So I'm going to take this and square it, and I'm going to take this guy and square it. Okay, the square undoes the square root, so I'm left with x squared plus 9. And on this side, 5 squared is 25. All right, Sophia, what's the next step? Good, I'm going to subtract 9 from both sides. So x squared equals 16. And Julia, what's the next step? Square root our answer. Okay, now here is where we get two solutions, right? Because I'm solving for a variable. So we get positive 4 and we get negative 4. If you want to write it as plus minus, that's fine. But I'm going to write it as two separate answers because we need to check them both. Okay, so let's go up here and check. I'm going to just kind of do it in my head. You guys okay with that? All right, so if I plug in 4, what's 4 squared? 16. Help me out here. Plus 9. 25. What's square root of 25? 5. What's 5 minus 5? Does it work? Yes. Let's try negative 4. Now, when you plug in this negative 4, you are using parentheses. So what's negative 4 squared in parentheses? 16 plus 9, 25, square root 5, right? So we get the same thing and it works. All right, so both answers are correct on this one. Okay? No extraneous solutions. All right, last one. Square root of 2x minus 3 equals square root of x plus 2. Notice there's two radicals in this equation. We've got square roots on both sides. So we've already isolated them. All we need to do is square both sides. Okay, and we get rid of them nicely here. So I'm going to square this side to get rid of the radical, and I'm going to square this side to get rid of the radical. So I'm left with 2x minus 3 equals x plus 2. And now this becomes something you guys are familiar with. So we get x minus 3 equals 2 here. Get all our x's together. I'm going to add 3 over here. And we get positive 5. And yes, we need to check it. Okay. So if I plug in 5, everybody with me, 2 times 5 is 10. 10 minus 3 is, so we get the square root of 7. Let's see if it's equal over here. We got to plug in 5 over here. 5 plus 2 is, so we get a true story. It does check because we have equal on both sides. Okay?